Hello and welcome to another episode of Jesus Doctrine. Today I'm going to be doing part 2 of our series on the book of Ezekiel. Unfortunately, we're still in chapter number 1 and I want to go through some of the imagery of the vision that Ezekiel saw when he saw the throne of God and the angels in Ezekiel chapter 1. Now, before I get going, this could be quite intense, so please follow along. It might be a longer video. I'm going to try and keep it short, and I am going to cut things out to keep this flowing. But I want to say this to begin with. The prophecy and the apocalyptic language and poetry that would be used throughout the Bible when we look at prophecy of the end times or the throne of God or the coming of the Lord is quite difficult to understand. One of the keys to understanding such passages is to use the imagery that they use in the prophetic language is always found earlier on in the scriptures, in the Old Testament stories, particularly with the tabernacle and the children of Israel coming out of Egypt and traveling to the promised land of Canaan or Israel. And so when we look back at the scriptures, we can use that to understand what we're reading. It's also important to understand that the audience that this book was written to were an Israeli audience that were living at the time. It wasn't written for us looking at this through modern day lenses with our modern understanding. And so remember to think the way that they would have thought, not necessarily the way that we think today. So Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 4, Ezekiel's vision, and it reads as follows. As I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the midst of the fire, as it were, a gleaming metal. Now, it's probably a bit early to be going through a verse by verse breakdown, but I want to say something. I live in England. Right now, there are clouds outside of my window, and that's an everyday occurrence. For those living in the middle region of the world, the Middle East and the middle regions of the planet, such as Israel and Arabia and Babylon and Assyria and those regions, clouds would not have been as common, and water would have been the substance of life that's precious. And so clouds would not have been as common, so it meant something significant for them. In the history of the Israelites, they would have followed a cloud by day and a fire by night, and the cloud, it had its way of separating the children of Israel from the glory of God. So God is oftentimes spoken of as appearing in or behind this cloud. God is spoken of in the scriptures as being an all-consuming fire. And so here's this fire picture coming out from behind the clouds. And the wind speaks of the breath of God that is moving, or the Spirit of God that's moving in the midst of the cloud. It's very important that we understand some of the language going on in the scriptures. It's also worth saying that a whirlwind was a picture of judgment, and north is the direction in the scriptures that you find the judgment of God consistently coming from. Let's have a read at the next verse. And from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had a human likeness, but each one had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Like in the book of Revelations, the book of Isaiah, the book of Daniel, we see these visions of the throne of God, and these heavenly creatures are being mentioned in the clouds. We shouldn't be surprised by this because these creatures are linked to the throne of God. And so let's have a look at a few verses in the Bible that help us to pick apart what we're seeing in this passage. Psalms 104 verse 3 says, He lays beams of his chambers on the waters. He makes the clouds his chariot. He rides on the wings of the wind, and he makes his messengers winds, his ministers a flaming fire. In Psalms 104, we see the throne of God being established. The Bible speaks about the waters having beams laid upon them. The clouds have these beams laid upon them. Why? Because God is establishing his room, his throne room, where his throne will be. Guess what? It also speaks about it being pulled along by chariots. When I think of chariots, I think of horse-drawn chariots. Having a chariot is great when you want to carry someone that's sitting on a high chair or a throne, but you need an animal to drag that along. The angels, the Bible says, are the winds that are pulling along the chariots that move the throne of God, as being spoken of in that verse. We can go a little bit further. It goes on to speak about how the winds that pull along the chariot, that pull along the throne, are in fact the angels, which are also the ministering spirits, these flames of fire. Now, a lot of people don't understand this, but when you come to what's going on in the heavens and what's going on, all of the angels are simply reflecting the nature of God. So God is a consuming fire, wanting to bring judgment and justice to this world. And so there's a fire that burns within God. And so too, we see the reflection of that inside of God's creatures. His angels are also set on fire because there's a burning passion for justice and truth that burns inside of them also. And so we see all this imagery all coming together. And so this is important for us to understand, that Hebrews chapter 11 speaks about this as well. And I think it takes the quote from this same verse. In fact, let's read that together. Of the angels, he says, he makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. And verse 14 reads, are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation? It's really important when you look at the picture of what's going on in heaven to understand and to recognize that the angels' job is to do God's will. They are a reflection. They are an extension of the nature and the character of God. God has made the angels to reflect his glory, to do what he says, to reveal something about who he is. They're messengers sent to serve us so that we can best know who our God is. And so we're best able to understand, to comprehend, and to likewise serve God. The angels are here to serve us, but the angels themselves are just a reflection and an extension of what God is doing here on the earth. If we turn to another psalm, Psalm 68, I want to read something for you. The chariots of God are twice 10,000, thousands upon thousands, and the Lord is among them. Sinai is now in the sanctuary. This is a picture of what happened when the clouds and the throne of God descended on Mount Sinai. And in Psalm 68, it speaks about the number of angels, thousands upon thousands, 2 times of thousands upon thousands. This is a lot of angels. When you start to think of the kind of numbers of angels that are being seen, you're not surprised that the throne of God is covered, because all around the throne of God are angels. In fact, when you go in the Old Testament and you look in the tabernacle or in the temple, on the walls or on the curtains, you will find lots of angels being engraved all around the Holy of Holies and all around the mercy seat, which is the throne of God. This is important. God's throne is surrounded by angels. It is clouded up. It is surrounded. You can't see the throne because of the angels around it. In the same way that on earth, the cloud was used to cover the glory of God, so in the heavens, the angels surround the throne of God so that you don't see the throne itself. You don't see the glory of God, but you see the reflection of God's light bursting out. You see the aura around the throne of God as the light disperses through these angels of God. Why is this so important? Because God's glory is so much that we wouldn't be able to stand or even to look at it directly. So what does God do? He veils it with the clouds, and he veils it with the angels and the living creatures. Before I get too distracted, let us go back to the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel 1, verses 7 to 9. Their legs were straight, and their soles of their feet were like the soles of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on the 4 sides, they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. Each one of them went straight forward without turning as they went. Ezekiel sees the legs of these 4 living creatures as having burnished bronze legs with calves' feet. This speaks of this creature's ability to stand despite The bronze colour, the burnished bronze I should say, representing the fire and the judgment of God. Even in the most difficult of situation, this creature is able to stand. But what's more interesting to me is the fact that the combination here is the legs and the wings. This creature has 4 wings and it's able to fly without turning from the left or to the right. He isn't moved or swayed by anything. No circumstance, no judgment, nothing in life can move this angel from the destiny and from the will and the purpose that God has set it on. He is able to stand even though he has wings and is able to fly. This is just simply speaking about this creature being unmovable and will not shift for a moment from the purpose that God has put it on. I don't know if any of you have been to Buckingham Palace, but they have a special sanctuary, the Queen's Guard there. And they don't flinch and they don't move except when they are told to do their little march. And they do not get in the way of the Queen's Guard because they will not be hindered from doing the job that they have been set on. And so too it is with these living creatures that appear around the throne of God. Ezekiel 1 verse 10. As for the likeness of their faces, each had a human face. The 4 had a face of a lion on the right side, and the 4 had a face of an ox on the left side, and the 4 had the face of an eagle. Throughout too much of Christianity, there has been so much speculation as to these 4 faces. It's even interesting to see that there's so much artwork within the Christian faith about these 4 creatures and the 4 faces. Now, there are going to be those people that would say that these creatures have 4 physical faces. They have a conjoined body with 4 heads, one of an ox, one of a man, one of a lion, and one of an eagle. Many people go with that sort of conjoined image. I don't. I'm not too interested in that picture of it being physical. There are those that go on to start using symbolism and say this is symbolic of the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And they start using various means, either by how the book begins and they link it to a certain animal. John speaks of Jesus being divine. In the beginning was the Word and the Word was with God. So that's got to be speaking of the eagle flying in the heavens. To someone else, it would speak about he came on a lowly animal in a donkey. So that's got to speak about that the book of Luke, where it begins, where he comes in riding on a donkey through Mary. And there are many different ways that people have interpreted the theme or the author of the book, revealing different aspects of God linked to a creature. Again, I don't feel quite comfortable with that, especially when you look at the lists of people that disagree. If they all agreed, all the colours on the page would all line up perfectly, but they don't. Many Christians that are greater than me throughout the centuries have disagreed about how to interpret these creatures. So I want to take you through what I believe on it. Now, I'm not guaranteed to be right, but listen, you're probably going to find common sense and simplicity in this answer. So just take it on board. I believe that these 4 creatures do in fact represent something. It represents all of the created creatures on the earth. We see man, which is the greatest creature of all, that was made to have dominion over all the creatures on the earth. We also see the ox, which is the strength of the domesticated animals. We see the lion, which is the ferocious and the strongest of the wild animals out there. It is the king of the animals to some degree. Equally, we see the bird. Now, the bird's a bit different. It flies up in the heavenlies, and it's the greatest of all of the birds, flying high up in the sky, this eagle. And so here we see this depiction of all of God's creation being represented, both those that fly in the sky, those that are domesticated, those that rule by authority, the greatest of God's creation, humankind. This is a picture of God's creation, and the number 4 speaks of the completeness of all of those things found in nature. But let's go a little bit deeper with this. I said earlier that all of the angelic things reveal something about the nature of Jesus. So let's go there. Jesus flies high above in the heavens above us all, looking down with eyes that see every detail and that miss nothing. Jesus is a fierce lion that's going to come again in judgment to rule and to reign over his earthly dominion and kingdom in the same way that the lion comes. He is also the domesticated animal, the greatest servant of all, the burden bearer that carries the heavy yoke and that pulls the heavy plough through our lives so that he can break up those hard places and bring change to us. Jesus is that ox, that calf, that burden bearer that works the fields to bring forth fruit in our lives. He's also, guess what? He's also a man, a human being. God took the form of a man. You see, these four living creatures have taken on or are reflecting four of the natures and the identities and the characteristics, I should probably say, of the God whom they serve. But these four creatures also would mean something in the natural to the children of Israel that lived in the day of Ezekiel. You see, when the children of Israel, they went through from Egypt into the promised land, they would camp around the tabernacle. They camp around the throne of God on earth, the Ark of the Covenant. That was where the throne of God was and the mercy seat. And so when they would camp around this, God had commanded that they camp in a very set way. And when they did this, they would camp under four flags, one for the north, east, south and the west. Well, guess what? When you start to look at these flags showed these four creatures again. And so we're going to see upon the flag on the east, we're going to see the lion. When we look to the north, we're going to see an eagle that was carrying a serpent. When we look to the west, what we're going to see is an ox or a calf on their flag. And then when we look down south, we're going to see the face of a man. Now, what's interesting is that Judah was represented by the Lion of the tribe of Judah, as is written in one of the blessings given to Judah by his father in Genesis chapter 49. I don't have time to go to these verses. Check it out for yourself. Reuben's name literally means I've been given a son, a man-child. And so his name is the man, and that was the flag that Reuben would lead out in the south. When we go to the west, we see an ox or a calf, because Joseph, when he was blessed in Genesis 49 by his father, Ephraim and Manasseh, when they were blessed, they were given the promise that they would have the fullness of the land. And what animal is it that's used to work and to build the land but the oxen and the calf? And we can go around and I can keep doing this. But my point is that these four flags were around the four corners of the throne of God when the children of Israel were moving, following the tabernacle, and were camping around the tabernacle in the wilderness. And as it was on earth, so too it is in heaven. There are four faces, these same four faces on the living creatures, all around the four sides of the throne of God as it's there in the heavens. Everything that's on earth is a mirror of the things that happen in the heavens. And so we shouldn't be surprised by what we're seeing. So let us continue to go through the book of Ezekiel as we go to verse 11. Such were their faces, and their wings were spread about. Each creature had 2 wings. Each of the 2 wings touched the wing of another, while 2 covered their bodies. It was important that the wings covered the bodies of these creatures so that they were not subjected to the brightness of the glory of God. It was an act of humility. When we go and we look at other characters or other people in their life that experience the presence of God, guess what we do? We fall down flat on our faces because we know that we're not worthy, and we humble ourselves and bow down prostrate before God. So these living creatures use their wings to shield them from the glory of God. Despite spending every minute of every second of every day around the throne in the presence of God, they still have to cover themselves, to humble themselves, because of the glorious presence of God is too much for them to take. Seeing and being around the throne of God should strike a sense of awe and amazement and the beauty of God's holiness, and probably is going to reveal how sinful and unworthy we are, so that we want to cover ourselves, because the glory of God is too much for us to behold. And each went straight forward. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go without turning. I'm not going to say anything more about that verse other than sometimes we don't need any more distractions. Verses 13 to 14 read, "As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, like the appearance of torches moving to and fro among the living creatures. And the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning, and the living creatures darted to and fro, like the appearance of a flash of lightning." I know I've already said that the angels are reflecting the judgment that they see in God, but when I read about the coals, like burning coals of fire, I can't help but think about Isaiah 6, where an angel takes a hot coal from the altar of God and touches Isaiah's lips to cleanse him from his sin. And I have this same picture going on when I'm reading this verse. And this picture of this judgment to redeem people from the sin of their uncleanness through these hot coals was the purpose of the coals in Isaiah 6. And so I think about this judgment and this burning passion to cleanse people that these angels have in their heart, in the same way that as believers we too should have a burning passion to see people cleansed and washed by the blood of Jesus, and this fiery nature about us because Jesus lives in us. And so there's something about us that burns and that yearns and that longs to see God's mercy, forgiveness and judgment. Ultimately, the judgment that we want to see is people being forgiven and saved and set free. And I believe this is what these angels are representing and reflecting in the glory of God. Now, I hope you can notice something that I'm doing. I am now starting to make a connection between the things in heaven and the way the angels behave when they do God's work and the way that we behave when we do the work of God too. And it's going to become a bit more clear as we go along, but the angels are God's beings in heaven that do his will. And here on earth, we are God's beings that do his will. These angels reflect the glory and the light of God in the heavenlies. And on earth, the light of Jesus lives in us. And we're here to shine that light into darkness and to be his hands and his feet and to be the extension of God right here on earth in the land of the living. And so too, the same way the angels function in heaven is the same way that we should be functioning in earth. They're messengers, and so are we. Angels are referred to as the messengers of God, or the angels. That's what the word means, it's messenger. And on earth, guess what? We are the messengers. In the book of Revelations, each of the churches have an angel assigned to them, to the angel of the church of this. And I'm not sure whether it's speaking about an angel guarding over the church being spoken to, or the minister, the saint, the pastor within the church that's there to pour out the word of God and the message of God to the congregation, or to the congregation that are there to feed the word of God to one another. It's speaking of both. We are called to be God's representatives here on earth. And in the same way, around the throne of God, we'll witness what the angels are doing to reveal the nature and the character of God in the heavenlies. Let's keep reading. Let's go. Ezekiel 1, verses 15 and 16. "Now as I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth, besides the living creatures, one for each of the four of them. As the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was gleaming of beryl. And the four had the same likeness, their appearance and construction being, as it were, a wheel within a wheel." So I just want to bring up on the screen some of the images of what this wheel within a wheel might have looked like in the vision that Ezekiel was seeing. And we're going to think a little bit more on this once we've read a few more verses. So let's continue. "When they went in any of the four directions without turning, and their rims were tall and awesome, And the rims of all four were full of eyes all around. And when the living creatures went, the wheels went beside them. And when the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose. And when the Spirit wanted to go, they went. And when the wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Now, this is where I'm going to give you something that's completely from my own mind. I was boggled. I'm not going to lie. I've spent weeks looking at this chapter in the book of Revelation, mostly because I didn't understand the wheels. I've gone and read commentaries and I've read online, and the more I read about the wheels, the more I'm not comfortable. You'll find many people that will turn completely away from the Bible. They'll go to the book of Enoch. They will speak about the Orphanim, which is what the wheels, they say that they're living creatures, that the wheels themselves are angels. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, I don't know. I'm just going to read what the Bible says. And so I was perplexed about this. And there are those people that will start to link the wheels with the zodiac signs. Now I can do some cool stuff with the zodiac and with the heavens and the story that the heavens tell. And you will find some interesting things in the zodiac when you come to the Bible. However, I'm not going there either. I'm staying to what the Bible says. When I don't understand something in passages like this, I turn back to the Old Testament. So right now on the screen, you are going to be seeing some pictures from the Old Testament of the Ark of the Covenant. And then I'm going to read you a description of the Ark of the Covenant as found in the book of Exodus. Bezalel made the Ark of acacia wood. 2 cubits and a half was its length, 1 cubit and a half its breadth, and 1 cubit and a half its height. And he overlaid it with pure gold, inside and outside, and made a moulding of gold around it. And he cast for it 4 rings of gold for its feet, 2 rings on the one side, and 2 rings on the other side. And he made poles of acacia wood and overlaid them with gold, and put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark to carry the ark. Like I said, when you don't understand something, go back to the Old Testament and look at what the image of the things of heaven were like on earth, and then maybe you'll better understand the things that are in heaven. We understand the natural, so get the natural down first before we try to understand the heavenly. It's really important to take that order of things. Far too many people jump to understand heavenly matters without understanding the very things that are there that we can touch. And there's no reason why we can't understand the things that are here on the earth. So when you look at the pictures of the Ark of the Covenant, notice that there are 4 wheels or 4 rings or 4 rims on each of the 4 sides, around about by the corners, that were being used to carry the Ark of the Covenant. What they would do is they would take poles, and then people would use the 4 wheels and a pole to carry the Ark of God, to carry the mercy seat and the throne of God around. And this is exactly what we see in the Old Testament. When we go into the heavenly picture, we see these 4 wheels that are being moved about by the cherubim, by these 4 living creatures. And these 4 living creatures are using the wheels within a wheel to carry the Ark of God. Isn't that cool? These actual wheels are a part of God's throne, and God's throne appears to be alive. It has eyes all around it, so that all the way around the Ark of God, there is a wisdom and a seeing that God can do from his throne. That's cool. In fact, let me just read the passage that justifies what I've been saying about the shadow or a copy of the things in the tabernacle are to the original which is in the heavens. And the Bible says this: they serve as a copy, as a shadow of the heavenly things. For when Moses was about to erect the tent of meeting or the tabernacle, he was instructed by God saying, see that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown you on the mountain. You see, Moses was shown the pattern of things in heaven, the way things are in heaven, and he was instructed, as it is in heaven, so make it like that here on the earth, because the throne of God was meant to represent God's throne in exactly the same way like it is in heaven. And so we find these parallels going on. Now, if you look at the Ark of the Covenant, there are only 2 angels on it. And so that gives me a little bit of an issue, because when I read about what's going on in the throne room of God in heaven in Ezekiel, there are 4 living creatures or angels, these cherubim. And so where are the 2 missing in the Old Testament? I want to show you where they are because it's really cool. So as you know, there were 2 angels that were made facing one another on the Ark of the Covenant. Let me read that. And he made 2 cherubim of gold. He made them of hammered work on the 2 ends of the mercy seat. 1 cherubim on one end and 1 cherubim on the other end, of one piece with the mercy seat, and he made the cherubim on its 2 ends. The cherubim spread out their wings above, overshadowing the mercy seat, and their wings with their faces to one another. Towards the mercy seat were their faces of the cherubim. See, these 2 cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant would be there covering the place of the throne, the mercy seat, where God himself would sit, where Jesus is sitting. And they're covering it so the glory of the one that sits on that seat couldn't be seen by everyone, to cover his glorious presence so that people would not see God, because it would be too much to see God and to live. And so these angels, these cherubim, would cover the presence of God. There's 2. So where are the other 2 angels in the Old Testament connected to the Ark of the Covenant? There should be 4. Let's have a look at where the 4 are. Now, when we move the Ark of the Covenant into the temple, there are 2 massive cherubim that are placed right beside the Ark of the Covenant. So you've got 2 covering the face of God on the mercy seat, covering the presence of God on the mercy seat, and then 2 other freestanding cherubim standing before the throne of God. 4 cherubim in exactly the same way we expect to see 4 cherubim around the throne of God in heaven. 1 Kings chapter 6 says this: He put cherubim on the innermost part of the house. The wings of the cherubim were spread out so that the wings of the one touched one wall, and the wing of the other touched the other wall, and the wings touched each other in the middle of the house. So now we can see the 4 cherubim in this room with their huge presence touching from one wall to the wing of another to the other wall, with 2 more cherubim on the Ark of God itself. These are the 4 cherubim that represent the 4 cherubim that would be present at the throne in heaven that Ezekiel sees. We constantly see these 4s, we see these 4 faces, we see these 4 creatures, we see these 4 wheels. Why do we see 4 so often? It's the number of completeness. It's the natural number of completeness. And so 4 is a significant number to be seen when it's describing the complete number of these things around. Let's get back to Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 22 now. Over the heads of the living creatures there was the likeness of an expanse, shining like an awe-inspiring crystal, spread out above their heads. So what we see above the 4 living creatures is the floor of the throne room of God. And the Bible says that it's sparkling like an expanse. When you read the book of Revelations, you'll begin to read about how it's made of the precious stones. And so this is a picture of the floor of God, of the throne room of God made out of a precious stone. Now we can see that over the heads of the 4 living creatures is this glass crystal-like floor that's sparkling. Now, when you read the Old Testament, you will find that there were special gemstones that were used on the high priest's garments. But also when you read Revelation in the throne room of God, these precious stones make up the floor, which is held up by the wheels, which are controlled by the 4 living creatures. And this crystal floor is really important. Many of us are used to living on the earth. In fact, we all are. And when we have sunlight or light here, it's white light. It's a mix of all of the colours. But when we get to heaven, the light source is going to be very different. We're not going to have the sun, which is a mix of all the colours. Instead, we have pure light. And this pure light is coming from the throne of God. It's Jesus. And what happens is that when a diamond reaches pure light, it doesn't look spectacular in the way that you would expect. However, when you put a diamond on earth in white light, it looks spectacular. But there's a different kind of stone that gives spectacular colours and radiance in pure light. And they're called anisotropic stones. These stones are different and they're unique. They're quite rare, which is really interesting because the Bible lists a number of precious stones that were to be used in the temple that are also going to be featuring in the heavenlies around the throne of God. And all these stones are anisotropic because it allows for pure light to be reflected to make glorious rainbows and colours of light through the throne. Another interesting thing to think about is that when God steps off his throne and looks down through the floor of these precious stones that are being held up by the four living creatures, he's going to be able to see straight through it because of the qualities of the precious stones that are being used that allow light to pass through. And so all around the throne of God, the light can be seen emanating from his throne because it's using a glass like crystal all around it to allow God's light to reach every dark corner. Verse 23. Under the expanse, their wings were stretched out straight, one towards another, and each creature had 2 wings covering its body. So now we look at the other side, the underneath the throne of God, and the cherubim are having to cover themselves from the glorious presence of God that's coming straight down through the floor of the throne of God because of the precious stones that are being used. So on the screen right now, what you'll be able to see are these are the stones that are used in the Bible. And this is what they look like under white light, regular light here on earth. And this is what happens when you put them underneath pure light. And this is probably more likely the light and the colours that are going to be reflected down through the throne of God onto the living creatures and all around the midst of heaven. Verse 24 and 25 say, And when they went, I heard the sound of their wings, like the sound of many waters, like the sound of the Almighty, a sound of tumult, like the sound of an army. When they stood still, they let down their wings. And there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads. When they stood still, they let down their wings. These 4 living creatures around the throne were beating their wings to fly. And the sound was like the sound of many waters. It's like the Niagara Falls, the sound of rushing water that's so drowning out and strong that you can't hear anything else. But the second they hear the voice of God, their wings come down and they stop. And above the expanse, over their heads was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like sapphire, and seated above the likeness of the throne was the likeness of a human appearance. Here we see above the throne of God that's made of these precious stones again, just like I described earlier, we see Jesus in the form of a human being. We see God in the form of a human being. It's Jesus. And there he is, seated on his throne in glory. Verses 27 and 28. And upward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw it as it were gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire enclosed all around. And downward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw it as if it were the appearance of fire. And there was a brightness around him, like the appearance of a bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain. So was the appearance of the brightness all around. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard the voice of one speaking. Finally, in these last parts of the chapter, we now see the rainbow and the glory and the light Jesus is the light of the world. He is a pure light. And we see the rainbows showing the promise of God that he will not destroy the world again by water, although he will judge it by fire. And we see all of these things appearing around the throne of God, reminding us of his promise of mercy and compassion around the throne with his rainbow. We see the brightness of his coming and his glory and his radiance and appearance. And we're reminded that here is a king that's so dazzlingly bright that it's going to strain our eyes just to begin to look at him. This is the image that Ezekiel sees of the throne of God. Now, hopefully you found this useful or interesting. Please do leave your comments and your questions below. There's a whole lot of things that I couldn't fit into this video, and I just wanted to get this video made. And this is giving you the basics that you can probably go away and use this in other chapters that are difficult like this to better understand what things are being seen and what things are being spoken about. If you are new to my channel, please do like, comment, subscribe. And really, this is an important one. Share this content. It's not easy to get good Christian content out there at the moment. So share this because it might be useful to someone else. Hopefully, we can work together as we continue this study of the book of Ezekiel to better understand the things that are being spoken of here. And if there is anything I've said that you don't agree with, that's absolutely fine. Ignore that part and keep coming along with me, because I'm sure there are things that we'll disagree on that we can learn together. Good night and God bless you.